Imagine a 3-month-old baby boy. Let's call him Liam. It's the middle of winter and his siblings are sick. After a few days of a runny nose and a bit of a cough, Liam has what appears to be a cold. But on the 4th day, he has trouble breathing, becomes irritable, refuses to feed, and is sleepy all the time. His breathing gets worse and becomes very fast, so Liam's mum and dad take him to the emergency department. He has a high temperature and looks very unwell. He's admitted to hospital, given oxygen to help him breathe, fluids in his veins. He has a swab of his nasal fluids taken. Respiratory Syncytial Virus, or RSV, is found, a virus that is currently not vaccine preventable. Liam's parents have never heard of it. He ends up with pneumonia and spends many days in hospital recovering. This is scary for Liam's parents. Eventually, he does recover and then goes home. But he continues to have troubles with his breathing, and his parents are worried about the long-term impacts on his lungs. This is the story of one child. It could have been the story of a friend's son, a nephew, maybe even your own son. Because this is not a rare story. Across Western Australia, 1 in 3 children will present to an emergency department for an acute respiratory illness before their 5th birthday. What's worse, 1 in 15 children will progress from the emergency department and are admitted to hospital, where they can spend up to a few days with a respiratory infection. I want to change these figures, and I know I'm not alone. Data are generated every day. In the case of health, data are generated when people come into contact with services. When a baby is born, a child or an adult goes to the emergency department or is admitted to hospital, has a routine pathology test like a blood sample or a nasal swab, a routine vaccination, records are formed. Data that's in these records, let's call them public records, were established several decades ago and contain information on every birth in the population. Alone in these datasets, the information is really meaningful. But the power comes when these data are joined together. When you can join up information from birth records to future routine vaccinations, to pathology tests, to future hospital admissions, that's the real benefit. And not just on one child, like Liam, but on every birth across the whole population. These joined up data can then start to tell us a story and provide us with a roadmap for the patterns, the determinants, and the consequences of poor health. These joined up data, which can be explored using rigorous science, can then be used to generate and answer new questions such as why, how, who, and when. They can then be used to recommend, advocate, but most importantly, evaluate health prevention policy. Using our data means that the findings that are uncovered are representative of what's happening in our community and in our population. Preventing disease in children is multifactorial and complex. We need to use these joined up data across multiple streams of information together to discover the need for new health prevention policies and improve the existing ones. Let me give you some evidence. The first example is by looking at over 210,000 babies over a 10-year period. Babies who were born via elective caesarian had an 11% increased risk for hospital admissions due to bronchiolitis. That's the illness that's caused by RSV, the virus that Liam had. And this was after adjusting for maternal factors and pregnancy complications. What this means is that delivery without labour could be impairing a newborn's immune system, making them more susceptible to infection. An important discovery, given the rising caesarean rates we see across the world. Second example is by looking at immunisation records, birth and pregnancy records on 1.9 million Australian children. It was found that as many as 1 in 4 children are not receiving their routine vaccinations at 2, 4 and 6 months of age on time. The data identified key groups where only half of these children were receiving their routine 6-month vaccination, like for the whooping cough, on time. These groups included babies born into larger families, those from lower socioeconomic areas, and those who were born to mothers who smoked during their pregnancy. A delay in receiving a vaccine is putting a child at risk for a potentially deadly disease. These data can now be used to pinpoint those key groups in the population that would benefit the most from targeted reminders to encourage timely vaccination. The third example is by looking at maternal immunisation records and birth outcomes on over 60,000 pregnancies. Not only did the influenza vaccine given during pregnancy reduce the risk of mums getting sick with the flu while they were pregnant, it actually reduced the risk of stillbirths by 50%. This evidence demonstrating the health and the benefits of influenza vaccination is now used in maternal vaccination guidelines to encourage more pregnant mums to get vaccinated with the influenza vaccine while they're pregnant. Bringing data together from multiple data sets, like in all those examples I just told you about, is called data linkage. Data linkage has been around in Western Australia since the 1970s, and it's done in a very safe and ethical way. There has never been a breach in privacy, not like Facebook. Combining data from multiple data sets on every birth in the population is done in a very controlled environment. Data are only released to qualified researchers from academic institutions who are bound by confidentiality requirements. These qualified researchers have no access to individuals' names, addresses, or any other sensitive personal information. They're not necessarily interested in just one individual, but all individuals together across a whole population. That's because by looking at a whole population, you can obtain accurate and unbiased assessments of disease rates, the risk factors for disease, what viruses and bacteria cause infection, and what effect a public health intervention has on the whole population. It's important for me to tell you how much data we have available. I believe it's important for the community to know how these joined-up data can be used with rigorous science to provide evidence, like in those examples. Because I'm guessing not many people really know about this, and that this is how evidence on the health of our population can be used to inform policy. We need to reassure the community that these joined-up data can be used and respected by qualified researchers for public good. That these data can ultimately be so powerful they can change people's lives. But there's a downside to this. Science is competitive, and it's difficult to have sustained funding for health research. The success rate for national grants is around 15%. This year, in Western Australia, 1 out of 27 mid-career researchers were successful for their fellowship. That is a salary, so they can continue their research and remain employed. This represents a lot of missed opportunities in scientific research. Now, you may have noticed I'm a woman. And what makes it more challenging for women in science is when they have career disruptions and work part-time, most often due to raising a young family. I'm not only a woman in science, I'm a mother in science with 2 young children and a third on the way. And having my career disruptions, or children as I like to call them, has slowed down my productivity. I deal with constant tiredness. At the moment, thanks to this, a fair bit of nausea, and I have less working hours to get done everything that I need to. Like many other mothers in science, I'm constantly juggling between my parental responsibilities and being a good mum and being there for my young kids when they need me, and progressing my scientific ventures, presenting at national, international conferences, participating in that really important 8 a.m. meeting, and spending the time that is needed to write that next successful grant application in the same tight timelines as everyone else who's working full-time. But rather than giving up, I am here. and I am powering on. Because this is important work. This is important science that needs to be done. Not only because I know this data linkage research is ultimately going to benefit me and my children, but because I want to make a difference. I want to reduce that figure of 1 in 15 children being admitted to hospital for a respiratory infection by 50%. So, in the case of RSV, we need a vaccine. RSV vaccines are currently in clinical trials all over the world, including here in Perth. The World Health Organization, which has prioritised RSV vaccine development, predicts there will be a commercially available RSV vaccine by 2025. I want us to be ready by 2025. For a vaccine to receive public funding in Australia, it needs to be shown to be cost-effective. That is, the benefit outweighs the cost. To determine this, you need to define the cost. To determine the cost, you need to know about the burden of disease. This means knowing disease aspects such as the seasonal characteristics, the age distribution of who is affected, the risk factors, the consequences, these complex patterns of infection. And not just on 1 or 2 individuals, but on a whole of population basis. These answers lie in the data that are available. We need to advocate for the continued use of these joined-up data to conduct rigorous science to provide the evidence, critical evidence that is needed to give us the best shot at preventing morbidity due to respiratory infections. We need to talk about our research and share our evidence with the community so that Liam's parents know what RSV is and other infectious diseases and can be reassured that there are teams of qualified researchers out there fighting to prevent it. I'm only a small voice in the very large world of science. But like every cent, every voice counts. We can all contribute to science, each and every one of us. We can now listen. We can now learn. We can open our eyes up to the opportunities that are right in front of us. Children are our future, and I believe we all have a duty to ensure they can reach their full potential without infectious diseases. Our data can save lives, and if used in the right way, we can reduce the number of Liams that have to go to hospital. Thank you.